So welcome everyone to this session where we will try to enlighten your mind on how to deliver disaster recovery as a service using the different technologies from the Microsoft product stack. Our ambition as presenters for this session is to provide you with that positive gut feeling that nothing is impossible to design when using the right tools provided from Windows Server, System Center, and of course, Microsoft Azure. My name is Robert Hedblom, and my background is delivering scenario-driven solutions based on the System Center stack, Windows Server, and Microsoft Azure technologies, with the main focus of backup as a service, restore as a service, and most importantly, disaster recovery as a service. I'm an MVP for System Center Cloud and Data Center Management, and I'm also an elected member of the Microsoft Extended Expert Team. I'm an author that's written 3 books, and I also deliver System Center trainings. I work for a company called Lumagate that is a specialized System Center company that delivers its services on a global scale. With me here on stage today, I have 2 of my friends, John Joyner and Shivam Garg. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Shivam. I'm a program manager in Data Protection Manager team. And before that, I worked on Hyper-V Replica, which is the key replication channel which is used in Microsoft Azure Site Recovery, as announced in the keynote by Brad. I joined Microsoft roughly 8 years back, and I have been working on backup and disaster recovery space from last 3 years. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Shivam. My name is John Joyner. I'm privileged to be a Microsoft MVP for System Center Data Center Management. My job at ClearPoint, which is a service provider specializing in delivery of managed services from Windows Azure, is Director of Product Development. My latest product is available in the Windows Azure Store, which delivers the ClearPoint management solution into Azure VMs. Let's go. In this session, we're going to cover a very topical and interesting theater of IT planning and operations that revolves around backup, restore, and disaster recovery solutions from Microsoft. So whether you're a service provider that provides services to other companies, or you provide services within your organization, the business concepts of backup as a service, recovery as a service, and disaster recovery as a service, as service offerings are going to be valid and hopefully interesting. So we're going to give you some specific examples of how you can assemble service offerings from the many tools that are available in the Microsoft Cloud platforms, which are, of course, Microsoft Azure, Windows Server, and System Center. And we want you to take away from this presentation a solid understanding of how you should configure and manage the various tools to manage your various workloads to create your service offerings. We want to achieve with these offerings a solid sense of satisfaction that business continuity is going to happen regardless of the contingency, small or large. Robert, tell us about the agenda.
Of course. My pleasure. So what we will focus on delivering today is to make clear that all attending this session will understand some of the core concepts regarding disaster recovery and, most importantly, its dependencies. We will cover Data Protection Manager 2012 R2. We will also walk you through the Microsoft Cloud tool that you can use to empower your disaster recovery scenarios that will, of course, be reflected in your business continuity plan. Last but not least, we will also cover Azure Site Recovery. That is one of our recovery services in the Microsoft Azure technology. Sounds good? Thumbs up?
All right.
Good. You're interacting. I like that. Awesome. So with that said, why don't we start this session by taking us back to the real beginning of planning a disaster recovery scenario. Let's start by look at something that we call a business continuity plan. So what is it? And that, my friend, was an echo. You all got that? Cool. So what is a business continuity plan? Well, the main focus of a business continuity plan is to provide the correct information, for example, a disaster recovery scenario, okay, that will reflect the actual need of keeping the business up and running So it's very important to understand that the business continuity plan is not a static document, okay? It is an activity. True. Another very important thing is that the business continuity plan should never, ever be designed nor implemented during an actual disaster. You're laughing. Good. And that's the key thing. Keep that in mind. A successful business continuity plan is always implemented and designed and put in production before the actual disaster. So keeping the business continuity plan in mind, we will now look at some of the 3 core components that defines the modern data centers for a company or an organization. So the actual number of servers are not important, okay? If you have 1,000 servers or 100, it's not important. What is important is that your data center provides different services to the organization that are highly resilient and, of course, highly automated. True? You care or not? Yeah? Good. So automation could either be done using System Center Orchestrator or SMA with the interaction of Azure Pack. So what it all comes down to is how you design your services and the services that you would like to provide to your end user IT staff. How do you design them? Well, always start with a thorough planning. That's the first thing, where you decide the actual goal for the service and the layout, like the roadmap, and the steps to create the service. Most important, never, ever talk about backup in the first place. Sound strange? What you should be doing is talking about restore and recovery of the service. Because backup is never a challenge when using Microsoft technologies. You know what backup is? It's all about design, how you design it, what components, and so on and so forth. The service that you will create will be a combination of different technologies and possibilities provided by Windows Server, System Center, and of course, Microsoft Azure. When building this and designing restore scenarios for organizations, the discussion regarding disaster recovery always comes up. And the disaster recovery is of major importance for the gold classified services within a modern data center, okay? The most common showstoppers that I see in the field when I'm working for providing a decent disaster recovery scenario is cost and complexity. It is expensive to purchase hardware that has, for example, a lot of storage and can perform geo-replication between 2 different production sites, okay? And you never want to add complexity to a disaster recovery scenario. And the complexity comes from trying to make third-party solutions work in an optimal way with Microsoft technologies. This is, of course, what I hear from a customer perspective, but that is also the most important perspective, isn't it? Your perspective. So by leveraging the different capabilities and possibilities in System Center, Windows Server, and the services provided in Microsoft Azure, the cost and complexity, there are no longer any showstoppers. Many of you in the audience may have a disaster recovery plan already in place, and some of you may not. But how do you actually start building a primary disaster recovery scenario? So the first step is to define your services in your data center. What are they? How are they designed? And what components are they built from? And how should they cooperate to provide the service to your end user or your IT staff? All services provided in your data centers are not of the same importance. They're not. Some services is, of course, more important than other services. Classify your services using 3 different categories: gold, silver, and bronze. But how should you know that some services are gold and some are silver. Well, the more important a service is, the lower RTO and RPO value it should have. A service that the company or organization more or less depends on has a very low or zero value of RTO and RPO. So the RLO value, well, that's the definition of what level of recovery should occur. This is, for example, applicable for a SharePoint farm. Should I be able to restore a site, a content database, or the entire farm? Well, this is, of course, listed and provided within your business continuity plan. John, where are you, John? There you are. Hey, could you please be so nice and shed some light over the different tools that we could have and use when our classification is done, and we know how and why we should protect our services?
Thank you, Robert. That was a really good laying of the business background for these different recovery objectives. So now let me get into tools. This slide right here is perhaps one of the most important ones in the deck for me because a key takeaway from this presentation is that you guys will become familiar and have in your toolkit all the tools that the Microsoft Cloud platforms of Azure, Windows Server, and System Center make available. And my point is that Microsoft has provided this palette or this menu of tools that you can select from, match them against your workloads, against your tolerance for the various disaster recovery scenarios that Robert outlined, and you architect the right fit, right cost solution, right service offerings for your organization. So Microsoft does not force you to choose one or a small number of monolithic backup products that may be more expensive or more complex than your organization needs. When thinking about how to map Microsoft Cloud solutions to business continuity, start with the workloads as this slide is organized, and then select the Microsoft tools that provide the best cost benefit to your organization. Consider that some workloads, like Exchange, Active Directory, they have built-in disaster-tolerant features that may not require that you have a dedicated backup solution. Notice that besides DPM, Microsoft Azure is a common theme on this slide. So if your organization already has an investment in Azure in your IT estate, absolutely you should be considering and leading with the Azure-based options. If you are not yet participating in Microsoft's cloud solution, Microsoft Azure, because of the many tools and the many features that might save your organization a lot of time and money in deploying a real DR plan, starting your cloud journey by establishing disaster-tolerant and disaster recovery resources in Microsoft Azure might be just the boost that your organization needs to begin your cloud journey. So taking a look at the workloads and the DR tools on this slide, I want to point out in the session that Robert, Shivam, and I are going to be demonstrating SQL backup to Azure. We're going to be looking at how you can leverage a backup of SQL directly into Azure. We're going to discuss how the built-in Windows file Windows backup utility that comes with Windows is actually very handy because it's one of the only two ways that you can back up system state. Then we're going to also show examples of how, in fact, we're going to have a demo here in just a minute and do a deep dive into the Azure site recovery and show how Hyper-V replication channel between sites is a great tool that we should all start using. And in fact, I'm going to introduce you to the concept that SQL Always On is also a replication channel. So please keep this slide in mind and for the rest of the presentation if you can. And remember that the point is identify your workloads, know the tools, and then assemble your scenario. I didn't mention in my introduction that I am a System Center Operations Manager expert. I've co-authored the 4 books in the Operations Manager Unleashed series from SAMS. So I've pretty much built my career on Operations Manager. And I'm delighted to be able to speak to you because I can share from firsthand experience that Operations Manager is a fantastic platform to be the single pane of glass that is observing and managing all of these different components of your DR solution. They're coming from the Microsoft Cloud. So there are management packs for all the products in this list. And many of these management packs include tasks and recovery actions that allow you to actually provide remote instrumentation and remote activation of different DR tools to save you time and actually make it achievable and make the roll-up of all of these different tools manageable from a single place. For example, Windows Server Backup, there's an excellent management pack from Microsoft that we'll take a brief look at. The management pack will alert you when a job fails. Hyper-V Replica, if you're using that to base your DR solution on, you can certainly get notification that there's been a failure of the replica process. That's very important. Data Protection Manager, if you're using that, as we highly encourage you in this presentation to use as a foundation of your plan, you're going to want to know if a tape unit is failing. You're going to want to know if a disk replica is filling up in space. If you're using Microsoft Azure, all of your Azure attachments are based on subscriptions. So it's very important that you get alerting proactively that your subscription might be about to expire. The Azure Management Pack provides that alerting. You might be using an Azure Virtual Network to provide connectivity to DR resources that are in Azure. The Remote Access Management Pack will provide alerting on this. SQL Server Backup, I'm going to show you in detail later in the demo how you can leverage new tools from Microsoft to just make a beautiful solution for long-term retention of your SQL backups. If you base those on well-known SQL agent job activity, the SQL Management Pack clear alerting when there's been a failure of one of those jobs. If you're leveraging the distributed action group, distributed availability group concept of Exchange to provide multiple copies of your databases of at least one of which is in a DR site, being notified that there's only one usable copy left in that availability group, very critical. That comes out of the box from the Microsoft Management Pack. Last example, if you're depending, of course, on replication of Active Directory to your DR site, you need to know that the replication is not working. The Active Directory Management Pack will alert you. So being able to leverage all these management packs as your eyes and ears, and sometimes your hands in these remote DR environments is just critical, and it's a great solution. Now, let me introduce the concept, though, that if you're going to, as I encourage you to do, deploy Operations Manager, and if you haven't already done so, as the overall monitoring engine for your DR scenario, pay attention to where you locate your System Center management servers. If you have all of your management servers located in your primary site and you haven't taken any other precautions, and your primary site is lost, you've lost the window from which you were going to observe the successful failover. But there's really three ways that I can suggest that you can architect your Operations Manager deployment to accommodate this. One is to architect your management group in a geo-redundant fashion by using, for example, SQL always-on clustering to create a second copy of your Operations Manager database, have multiple Operations Manager management servers of which you can promote one to the RMS emulator in the hot site, or rather in the DR site, so you can architect high availability within your management group so that you continue management from the surviving site. You can also locate your management group in a third location, in an uninvolved location. For example, another branch office that has good connectivity to both your primary and your DR site. And a third and totally valid option, this is what my company does, you can outsource the location of that System Center instance to a cloud provider that watches all of your primary and your DR site from essentially a high ground. And just also remember that by using Operations Manager Gateway servers, you don't need to have fully routed network connectivity from your Operations Manager management group to your monitored primary and recovery sites. Just an Operations Manager Gateway with outbound internet connectivity on the standard TCP port of 5723. That's all you need to do to provide full management and monitoring in each of your sites. Now we're going to take a look at Azure Site Recovery. This was shown off in the keynote with the introduction of the new information that your DR replicas of your Hyper-V machines will be able to be hosted in Microsoft Azure. That is not available today, but everything that I'm going to show you today, just imagine that the other half is going to be available to be hosted in Microsoft Azure soon. This is a build slide. So to understand how Microsoft is positioning Site Recovery Manager as the orchestration engine for your replication channels, let's look at a familiar model. It's a 4-layer model. The first 3 layers you're probably familiar with. We begin with the fabric in the data center, your compute, storage, and networking resources. We lay our virtual machines on top of these. We run our applications in the virtual machines. This is familiar. Now let's think of replication channels between our applications. Already available with Windows Server 2012, Hyper-V Replica. Available with SQL Server 2012. Many companies are really investing and making plans around using SQL Server always on. Well, both of these products have essentially replication channels. And so imagine Azure Site Recovery as the orchestration engine that lives in the cloud, in the high ground, that is able to positively affirm the health of the replicated applications, for example, Hyper-V and SQL. And so expect perhaps even more applications to be added to this list. Now we're going to, let's see, the slide doesn't advance. There we go. So within the context of these 4 layers, take a look at this solution topology map. We have 2 sites. On the left, the primary site. On the right, the secondary site or the DR site. We have Windows Server 2012 or later in both locations, and we have System Center 2012 SP1 or later in both locations. Specifically, we have Virtual Machine Manager. So Virtual Machine Manager is essentially the agent process controlling the replication channel. We have the Microsoft Site Recovery Service living in Azure, and through the management of the replication channel, the Site Recovery Service is able to observe the health, the continuous health of both sites, and when there is a DR action, orchestrate that failover. Security concerns about this, as you may have heard the discussion item, your data doesn't go to Azure in this solution. Only the metadata that's needed to assure that the replication is occurring, and your instructions on how you want failover to occur. We're going to take a look inside the Site Recovery Manager portal. We're going to see the little mini development, mini orchestration environment that's provided where you can sequence the startup of your sites. Another security feature to be aware of, or security good aspect, is that there's very little change required to your environment. There's just a recovery process, a recovery agent that is running on your virtual machine manager servers. There's no changes required whatsoever to the Hyper-V hosts. There's no changes required to the virtual machines. The entire process leverages the built-in Hyper-V replica services that come with Windows Server. And even another security aspect, you can isolate this solution quite a lot. Neither the host nor the virtual machines need internet access at all. Only the one virtual machine instance or the clustered virtual machine server instance that is providing the metadata up into Azure needs some outbound internet connectivity, but it works perfectly through a proxy server. So you can lock that down just to the metadata traffic coming from the VMM server into the Azure cloud, and that does work with the proxy server, and just standard internet firewall is all that would needed. You don't need to re-architect your network to use this. So let's take a look at a demo. I'm sorry I'm not as funny as Robert. Robert, you've been doing a great job of keeping the cloud lively, but I hope I have some good demo content. So we're in our Microsoft Azure portal. This would be your subscription, and we're focused on the Recovery Services tab. In a moment, Robert is going to give a deep dive into configuring the backup vault with DPM. But look at the area that I have highlighted. It's labeled Hyper-V Recovery Manager Vault. And this is a special area in your Microsoft Azure subscription that is created when you install the provider that I talked about on your first VMM server. A key aspect of the recovery manager is that you create a recovery plan. And we've created a recovery plan here, which is to recover some virtual machines from the primary cloud into the DR cloud and make them live. And I'm going to launch a test failover right now. There is a single failover button. It's not a big red button. It's not red, but it is big. It's easy to find. And just this one simple failover button expresses the simplicity of this plan, which is its strength. It's really its biggest strength. I'm going to push the test failover button right now rather than the real one, because I want to show off how cool some of the test features are that make the solution even more attractive. I do have to make one decision when I launch a test. I have to decide whether I'm going to connect the machines that come up in the DR environment as part of the test, whether I'm going to connect them to a network or not, because I may not want them connected to a network. And in this example, I'm not going to connect them. So I've just launched a recovery, I've just launched a plan in action. And while that's running, let me show you a little bit behind the scenes of the solution. Okay, here we're looking at Virtual Machine Manager in the protected environment. One of the things that my company, ClearPoint, does is we host the lab where the Systems Center Unleashed books are authored, the whole series. You'll see our logo on the cover. And you're looking at a view inside that lab, and there's a book that's in progress being authored. It's for Service Manager. And that's the cloud that's been selected for this demo. And 2 of the machines from this cloud are being protected by the Site Recovery Service. So I mentioned that there's very little that has to be done to modify your environment to use the solution. Installing the provider adds this detail to the general page. You notice the box is ticked to send information about this cloud outbound to the Azure Site Recovery Service. And then once the service is enabled, you'll see below this confirmation of the name of the recovery cloud and the name of the VMM server in the target or the DR site network that is responsible for keeping the replicas healthy. I also mentioned that there's really no change needed to the virtual machines. If we look at the property of one of the 2 virtual machines, you can identify them because the replication status column shows that they're replicating. Those are the 2 that we've selected. If we look at the properties of one of these machines, on the Hardware Configuration tab, under Hyper-V Recovery, this is enabled. So just checking these boxes in the default application is all that's needed to make your virtual machines to be protected by Site Recovery Manager. Going back to our Azure portal, I mentioned the recovery plan needs to be created. In fact, there's a handy, basically the 5 steps that you need to launch this process. You push the little cloud logo, you get the 5 steps to remind you where you are in setting it up. There's a process to create a certificate and upload it to Microsoft. Robert is going to cover that in detail when he shows you how to enable DPM attachment to Azure. Same process is used to create your Hyper-V Recovery Vault. Downloading of that provider to your VMM server is the next step. You'll most likely download one to the VMM server in your primary site and one to the VMM server in your DR site. Then you're going to set up the recovery plan, which I'll show. We're going to check on the status of the job in a second, which should be almost done. It takes about 3 minutes if it's all working. And then I'm going to show you this one piece. It's really the only headwork that you need to do. When we go into the Resources tab and we select the networks, on the left side we're going to list the name of the VMM server at the main network, the protected network, and then we're going to list the name of the VMM server at the DR network. And the Hyper-V, the recovery service already having the metadata uploaded knows all the networks that are resident at both locations. And so it makes mapping them a pretty simple process. You noticed I've only needed to map one network for this plan to work because the 2 machines at both ends are sharing the same network, so there was no need to overcomplicate it. But you can see if you have more complicated scenarios involving storage networks or DMZ networks, it's a simple matter to associate them. For example, I'll just pick one at random, push the map button, and it's now going to show me the target networks that exist at the DR site. And so I get a real easy to select drop-down list, match up the DR networks with the site networks. And that's all that Recovery Manager is going to need to do to create and orchestrate successful failovers of the machines that when they wake up, they're on the correct network. Going to our Jobs tab, we can see that the job is in progress. And unfortunately, we've had a failure. I'm very sorry. It happens in live demonstrations. I have good diagnostic error information that I could figure out what went wrong. Sorry, folks. It's the danger of live demonstrations. But you can see how I described the mini replication engine. If we look at the recovery plan, when I author the plan, we have these 3 buttons at the bottom: group, script, and manual action. What I had provided for in the demonstration, which didn't work, I'm very sorry, a dialog box would have popped up after the first machine was spun up and said, ready to proceed to the next one, and I would have clicked OK. Something that I want to point out, and I just learned this myself here at TechEd because this is a new announcement, is this concept of replication channels and how you would incorporate SQL always on into your recovery plan. Once there's a PowerShell command, of course, that you can use to interact with SQL always on and tell the availability group, promote another node in the always on cluster to be the primary copy. And so in a scenario where if you saw the recovery manager demo at the launch demonstration, the keynote, I'm sorry, they had a group of domain controllers was the very first thing that woke up in the recovery site. So if your SQL servers were your second most important workload to have running, in between the waking up, or the group 1 that had all of your domain controllers and the group 2, which would have the other nodes in your SQL always on clusters in it, you would insert a script action, which would be the PowerShell command to instruct the surviving members of the SQL cluster, you're now the active node. So that's an example of how you can insert orchestration instructions into a recovery plan. I have a slide here that's a quote from Gartner that disaster recovery as a service is the first cloud service to offer value for an entire production infrastructure, all the servers and all the storage. And as a service provider, I can confirm that the number one ask from new customers is help us with our DR. Some of the reasons are listed here on this slide. Why do customers, why do your business organizations need your help architecting backup solutions? They are complex. They have to be monitored, babysat even. They can be expensive. They need to have storage provisioned, which requires its own maintenance. So organizations want to improve their service in their main lines of business and not dilute their effectiveness, essentially looking after the architecture, planning, and maintenance of the DR solution. So as a service provider or as a large organization, IT, that's needing to assure the business unit leaders that there's business continuity present for their data, this is a way, System Center, Azure, Windows Server allow you to meet that business requirement. As a service provider, I also can give you a few tips that, like Robert said, setting up the backup is the easy part. Keep in mind that it's the restore actions where the rubber meets the road and you're judged on the effectiveness of your plan. There's really 3 categories of restores to be prepared for. One would be your relatively simple, oops, a file was deleted. And this is an example of backup as a recovery as a service that is very appropriately extended to the user level in a self-service fashion. A second category of restores I can also relate to you from personal experience, unfortunately, are those restores that relate to often legal proceedings involving former employees or other sensitive legal matters, and these often require a lot of management attention. So it's a recovery as a service is not always a set and forget. There's often very high touch periods that you need to be prepared for. And then the third category is, of course, your disaster recovery activations. And if you're going to offer backup and or restore and or disaster recovery as a service, be prepared for the customer ask, and it's completely valid, that you're going to exercise full up tests of that service, perhaps semi-annually, and the the least churn and the least cost that you can architect around these expected full-up tests, the better your service will be experienced by the customer. So don't overlook the complexities and consequences of the failed back evolution when you're architecting these services. Now Robert's going to show us how System Center, many different components, can be combined to create a very rich disaster recovery solution.
True. So thank you, John. Okay, so here's the thing. How many of you guys are actually delivering backup as a service? Please raise your hand. Anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my, oh my, oh my. That's good. So I will show you a demo of a way to do it. Because as you may understand, there are so many ways of accomplishing a BaaS scenario. True? Yeah. But let's look at it from an end-user perspective, providing both backup as a service and restore as a service using the majority of the System Center 2012 R2 stack. So in this scenario, we will provide recovery capabilities to the end-user data by deploying a DPM agent to a Windows 8.1 client and protecting the end-user data according to a company protection policy, or a CPP, that is defined in DPM. With the great possibilities of protecting end-user data using the DPM client, many companies out there, they have stopped using the folder redirection policy. Ever heard of that? Yeah. So instead, they are providing the DPM client and provide the restore capability using that technology. So the scenario is this. A user opens his browser and browses to the Service Manager portal. In the portal, the user orders backup as a service for his client PC. Service Manager will invoke Orchestrator to deploy a DPM agent using Configuration Manager. Another runbook is invoked to verify, do I need to provision a new DPM server instance to my backup as a service? If so, another runbook is invoked, and a new DPM server is deployed using service template and tops up the configuration using Orchestrator. If there is no need to provision another DPM server instance to the BaaS service, the client will be included in a protection group in DPM and within a short time receive its company protection policy to start protect the end user data. Should we have a look? Yes? Are you excited? Woohoo, good. So here's my Service Manager portal. As you can see, I have backup as a service, I have restore as a service, and I have some other offerings there, but let's go over the backup as a service. I will request a client backup. Go to my request. And here I'm listed with the different clients I have been logged on into. And do you guys remember what I talked about earlier regarding the different classes? Gold, silver, bronze. So my IT department has defined the different classes that are providing my restore capabilities. And later on, I must have a good relation with my boss because he is the one who's going to pay for it. Okay? So I have a good relation with my boss, so I'm going to go with the gold class. As you can see, I also have silver and bronze, but I will go with the gold class. And I'll hit next, review the information, and I'll click submit. So what is actually happening now is System Center will verify my BaaS service. Do I need to deploy a new DPM server instance or not? Deploying the DPM agent, attaching it, and start protecting the end user data instead of using folder redirection policy. Should we go to the client? Oh, yeah. And here we are. So we're approximately like 250, 300 people. If this demo works, will you be like sharing and clapping hands? Could we just try it out once? Come on, clap your hands and woo! Yeah! Good. Then we all know what you should do, okay? Thumbs up. So here's the big thing. Did it work? There's my DPM client, and there's my protected items, and I have connection to my DPM server. There you go, backup as a service. Easy as that. So I will now focus on System-Centered Data Protection Manager 2012. And so let's shortly describe what DPM is, okay? So DPM is an optimized recovery function from Microsoft. Recovery function, okay? Saying that, the key concept is to provide an easy recovery experience to the DPM administrator to apply to the actual business continuity plan. So DPM is the product with the primary focus on Microsoft technologies. A key component of the BaaS, the RaaS, and the disaster recovery as a service, interacting with other System Center family members, and of course, Azure technologies. Keep in mind that DPM is designed by Microsoft for Microsoft technologies. And what that actually means is that at the end of the day, DPM will be the technology that will understand your data center's Microsoft workloads the best. Microsoft wrote the code. Microsoft provided the recovery capabilities. Yeah. DPM could also provide a disaster recovery scenario using a primary and a secondary DPM server. So if the primary DPM server should fail, the secondary DPM server will take over the primary DPM server role and continue to protect your production data center. You can also, this task can also be easily automated using Orchestrator, of course, but you can also, for a primary DPM server, integrate your remote restore services and disaster recovery services using the backup vault from Microsoft Azure Recovery Services. So DPM will protect your most common Microsoft workloads like Windows Server, SQL Server, Exchange, SharePoint, Hyper-V, System State, and Windows Client. So before you start to deploy DPM instances, you need to understand what you should protect and how this protection should be designed. Keep in mind what I said before. Backup is all about design. Always start by creating a thorough plan that is both accurate and well-structured. And with the knowledge and the plan and the knowledge of the DPM scale, it is easy to know how many DPM server instances you should deploy. True? And regarding the DPM scale, well, we can have 120 terabyte of storage. We can have 600 volumes. That's due to the LDM database in the operating system. And we can have 9,024 shadow copies in our disk pool. And Shivam, we presented in previous versions a feature called the co-location feature.
Yes.
Yeah. And the co-location feature is this. Due to that we have a limitation of the LDM database in the operating system, we needed to scale up the protection per DPM server instance. With the co-location feature enabled in the protection group, you can protect 1,000 virtual machines, 2,000 SQL databases, and 3,000 Windows clients. With the great possibilities of creating large Hyper-V clusters using the great technologies in Windows Server 2012 R2, DPM can also protect those large clusters. I won't spoil the moment because Shivam has a cool demo of this. He will show that in a few moments from here. And with the classification and the knowledge of the scale of DPM, you can start to design your recovery plans. And that will give you the possibility to create the optimal backup schedule. So with that in mind, let's look at some key design strategies for DPM. In the R2 release, it is now supported that we have a DPM disk as a VHDX file. This gives you the opportunity to provide an optimized deployment scenario and, of course, storage management. A very traditional approach in a non-modern data center is to have one server that focuses on the backup capabilities of the entire data center. This is what we call Lord of the Rings syndrome. One server to rule them all, right? So from a DPM and Microsoft perspective, we focus on the recovery. It's with a non-modern data center set in mind, many companies find it hard to deploy or challenging to deploy a large number of servers that should provide the restore and the backup capabilities. Well, here's the thing. The DPM server technology should not be seen as an actual server. It should be seen as an instance of your backup, restore, and disaster recovery scenarios or capabilities. Remember that a modern data center is highly automated and highly resilient. So with the cooperation of operations manager that John discussed earlier, you're able to provide a real-time monitoring experience and management experience. And with the central console installed on a management server in your management group, you're able to manage all your DPM servers. Automation, well, it is always a very important thing. Always keep automation in main focus. One, of course, is you would like to ease the burden for the help desk staff. True? And you can always use also the Azure Pack within the direction of SMA for automation scenario. So let's talk about archiving. Archiving your data for your services that your services depends on is a very critical concept for the gold classified services and data. And with the Microsoft Azure recovery service called the Backup Vault, you can provide, it's possible to reduce the tape usage. And for some companies out there, we have actually succeeded to eliminate tape usage. Once again, it's all about design. Know where you're at and know where you want to come to, and lay out the pattern on the road. So for an implementation for DPM to be optimal, it's critical that it reflects the company's RTO, RPO, and RLO value that corresponds with the company's SLA. So providing backup as a service, restore as a service, and disaster recovery as a service from a DPM perspective, it's very important to know these critical facts. So let's do a demo, should we? Let's demo how we can join forces between the Microsoft Recovery Service and the Backup Vault. So here you got the Backup Vault. Any of you try this out? Raise your hand. Some of you guys? Cool. So the first thing we need to do is to create a Backup Vault. And we hit Quick Create. And let's give it the fancy name TechEd 2014. And since I'm from Sweden, put that in north of Europe. And I hit Create Vault. So here's the cool thing. Azure, it is so fast. And it's so cool. But that's another thing. But it's so fast. So let's look at this Backup Vault while the other one is creating itself. What I can do is I can provide a dashboard experience where I can see my DPM server, that how many servers I have attached, the storage. I can see the protected items. And also, I can see the service attached. For example, DPM1. And from here, you can see now the Backup Vault is created. So let's go in there. The next step you need to do is to create a certificate where you can connect your DPM server to the recovery services. And of course, you download and use the Microsoft SDKs and use the makecert.exe. And here's a line that I will have, of course, made in advance, which we will create a certificate called TechEd. Keep in mind, you must have 2048-bit long certificate, and the certificate should not be expired within 3 years. So, creating that certificate, it is located here. There you go. There's the certificate. The next step is to manage my certificate and browse it. And from here, let's see, TechEd 2014. Bam. And I'm uploading it. So, uploading the certificate. The next step is to download the Windows Azure Backup Agent, install it on my DPM server, and there are two things that are important. The prereq are .NET Framework, of course, and the Identity Foundation. But the beauty is this. If I had not installed that on my DPM server, the installation will cover that for me. So after install the agent, I go to my DPM server. I go to online, and I click register. So from here, my DPM server starts talking to my online services. And I'm browsing for my certificate. There you go. Fetching the backup vaults. And there is TechEd 2014 in North Europe. There you go. So we can work behind proxies. It's not a challenge. We can make the restore experience or recovery capabilities beautifully behind the proxy. We can throttle the agent because we don't want to flood your production bandwidth. Okay? So you can throttle it using and define your business hours and the days. So recover from Azure, it's a two-way process or two-step process. Here's a question. If I'm about to recover 10 gigabytes of data from Azure, how much free space do I need in my recovery folder? Like 10 gig of data. So keep in mind, what I put in Azure, I must have sufficient free area in my recovery folder to be able to make the restore. Encryption. Well, the data passed from the DPM server up into Azure that is encrypted on the fly. And within Azure, the data is also encrypted using a specific passphrase that you generate, hitting the button, generate passphrase. What happens if you lose the passphrase? Can you call Microsoft saying, Microsoft support? Yeah, I lost my passphrase. Oh, sorry, can't help you. Pretty much that was happened. Because if you lose the passphrase, you must reconfigure everything. Don't lose the passphrase. Print it out, copy it to a USB, send it to a friend or whatever. Keep track of it, okay? Don't lose it. That's a key giveaway. So for file data, SQL data, and Hyper-V, we are able to provide the online protection using Azure technologies. Let's say for this example, this protection group, I can add online protection. I also could modify the protection group, but adding online protection gives me right what I need it to be. I mark what I need to put up in Azure. I can specify my online protection goals. I can do it daily, weekly. I can provide one recovery point per day or per week, have that stored for 120 days. If I put 2 recovery points up in Azure, I can have 60 days of recovery or retention time for my recovery capabilities. So I would like to round up my part of this presentation by sharing a very important thought. All good designs come from understanding your services data dependencies, right? Keep that in mind. And now, Shivam is a super resource, and we are so glad having him here on stage, and he will provide you all you got to know about private cloud protection. Shivam.
Thank you so much, Robert, for talking about the key capabilities of Data Protection Manager. But let me spend a moment to reflect why data protection and DPM in particular has become so relevant in customer conversations today. So first reason is the cloud inflection. If you see the data protection, it's a very, very entrenched business, and folks don't want to change the data protection strategies unless there is a good reason to change it. So if you look at the key inflection points, it's virtualization, because more and more apps are getting virtualized. And the second thing is about move to cloud. All businesses are moving to cloud, be it private, hybrid, or public. Second reason, integration with System Center. So DPM is no more a standalone product. It is bundled with System Center. So customers who buy the System Center suite, they say, hey, I already wrote a check to Microsoft. I bought a suite. Why should I be looking for another data protection software? Why can't I use Data Protection Manager? And the third reason is the customer profile, because more and more growth is happening in this segment. And these service providers, they have very tight SLAs which they promise to their customers. So in order to meet that, the fewer vendors they have in the supply chain, the better it is, because then they can meet the service level agreements. So I think these are the three reasons why DPM is kind of back from the dead, and I'll show you a demo on the private cloud protection. So here is a very quick journey. Let me just ask a quick show of hands. How many of you are using Data Protection Manager today? Oh, quite a few hands, great. And how many of you are using older versions like DPM 2012? Oh, so quite a few, okay. So if you move to, let's say, DPM 2012 R2, which is the latest version, let me just focus on what are the key things you get. A, you get management at scale, because we have a feature called Central Console, which is a single pane of glass, and you can manage multiple DPM servers. B, you get efficient protection for Hyper-V over CSV and Hyper-V over SMB. With that, you also get the migration feature. What it means is that if your virtual machine migrates from one cluster to another cluster in the same data center, DPM just talks to VMM internally, finds out where the virtual machine is residing at this point, and then your protection continues uninterrupted. You don't need to worry about it. And with 2012 SP1, we also started this journey into the public cloud. You can back up from disk to disk, you can back up from disk to tapes, and also to Azure. So that is something which was added in SP1. In R2, in 2012 R2, you have seen Brad's keynote. He talks about hyper-scaled or private cloud scale. So now we can protect at that scale. And along with that, you also get online backup or file system consistent backup of your Linux virtual machines. You get the online backup of that. How many of you are using the Linux virtual machines backup? Good. So now you get the online backup of that. So here are the two topologies. The first one, Hyper-V over CSV. Even after 2012 R2, we made a lot of fixes in the Windows Server and System Center, and we shipped it. Most of the customer deployments are here who use Hyper-V or CSV backed by traditional SANs. You get all the deduplication benefits, all of them. But with Windows Server 2012, we added a new first-class storage option, which is Hyper-V over SMB. And we keep making changes on this second topology. And what does it give you? It gives you flexibility, it gives you ease of use, and it is also a very, very cost-effective option to block-based storage. So now you can get highly available VMs, you get fault-tolerant storage, and you get continuously available file servers. All of this. So because of the cost economics and the performance, we see that more and more customers are moving to the right side, the second topology. So what are the key gaps now, even after 2012 R2? So I was talking to one of the large service providers, and he said only two things. The first one, I need reliable backups at scale, because things sometimes do fail, and I still want to make sure that my SLAs are met. So first one, give me reliability with DPM. What do you guys think might be the second one? Any guesses? Sorry? Not the cost, you get the cost, but yeah, okay, good. But how can you, go ahead. Okay, I think he already mentioned you get a good recovery, but it is about deduplication, because you buy a bunch of storage, But on top of that, if you are using DPM, you need to get the deduplication benefits. So deduplication is not a new feature. It was shipped in Windows Server 2012. And in R2, we also started providing support for VDI workloads. But the ask was, hey guys, can you enable dedupe on the DPM storage? And here is a customer testimonial who is using Hyper-V over CSV. It's a Sweden-based service provider. He has a 14-node Hyper-V cluster and hosting 600 virtual machines. So he had a lot of complaints with DPM. He actually talked to me, I think roughly 4 months back, and he was using DPM 2010, a very old DPM. And he said, hey, why don't I get the reliable backups? And without going and debugging all the issues with the older version of DPM, I just said, hey, why don't you move to the latest stack of Windows Server System Center? And even I forgot, and after 4 months, I get a mail from him, and it's a very pleasant surprise for me. He says, I moved to the Windows Server System Center 2012 R2, and you know what? I'm able to devote only 1/4 of my engineer for DPM now. Earlier, I used to have 3 dedicated engineers. And the second point is also very, very important, because even if you have the point solutions from the other backup vendors, these service providers prefer to deal with fewer partners. Like Microsoft, just one partner. I can meet my SLA. If something goes wrong, I can just talk to Microsoft. I don't need to go to different point solutions for that. So it goes back to the third point I mentioned earlier. So here is the dedupe feature. It is on scaled out file server. As I said, we already support the VDI workload. And going forward, we are going to enable deduplication on DPM storage. So today, it is a post-process, chunk-based deduplication feature, and want to support DPM as a workload. Now, let me move to demo. I don't want to bore you guys, with this talk. So, and here is the setup. So I'll spend some time and also connect to this. So I have a 11-node Hyper-V cluster. So you can see here. So can you see a 11-node Hyper-V cluster here? Great. And let me show how many virtual machines I have. So I have 500 virtual machines on 11-node Hyper-V cluster. It's Hyper-V over SMB. And I have 2 DPM servers. It means each DPM server backs up roughly 250 virtual machines. On the storage side, I have a 4-node SOFS cluster, the scaled out file server. And then I have 40 terabyte of storage, 24 terabyte I have given for production workloads, and roughly 4 shares or 16 terabyte for the backup storage. So you can see all the disks here. You will see 10 disks. And then let me go to the DPM server, which is protecting this. Sorry. Yes. So if you see the DPM server, can you see this protection group which has like 250 virtual machines? Okay. And if you look at the protection policy, we are backing up roughly 8 times a day. Every 3 hours, we are backing up all these 500 virtual machines. So we are backing up like starting at 2:30 a.m., 5:30, 8:30, 11:30, 2:30, so 8 times a day. But let me show you what is more interesting. If I go to the jobs view, you will see some failures. So roughly you are running like on any given day. I just picked a date randomly. If you look at number of jobs running per day, it is like in thousands, 1,700 jobs which got completed. And if you see, you will see two types of jobs. When I say recovery point, it's a typical normal backup job, and which has succeeded. But you will wonder, why do I see the other type of job, which is a consistency check? And the reason for that is because if there are intermittent failures, whether it is like compute node going down or a storage node going down, there are some network connections, intermittent failures, you will see the backup job actually failed. But DPM knows that, and it actually automatically retried the backup job. So let me pick a virtual machine. So you can see at 11:30, when it ran the backup job at 11:30, it actually failed. But it retried the consistency job at around 2:18 p.m. automatically. Nobody had to have any manual intervention in this process. So if you look at this virtual machine, this particular virtual machines, you actually got all the 8 recovery points here. So if you translate it, if generally service providers, they provide daily backup SLAs, so net it comes out to like 500 virtual machines being backed up for 8 days without any failures, because any job which failed got automatically retried, and eventually it was a success. Pretty cool, right? So thank you. With this, I'll hand it over to John, who will talk about different workloads and different tools for different workloads. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivam. We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to basically go immediately into the demo, because there's a couple of things that I very much want to show you that I think are really interesting. The first is going to be, I'm just going to combine things to try and get everything done here in the 7 minutes that are left. The first thing that I want to show you involves some new features that Microsoft has made available for backup of SQL. As an architect that's often responsible for helping customers back up their SQL data, these new features that integrate with Azure were a great surprise to me to see that they were available, surprised to see how easy they were to use, and I want to share them with you. So the first is the Microsoft SQL Server Backup to Azure tool. So this is a tool that Microsoft makes available for all editions of SQL Server, not just the newer versions. The newer versions, 2012 with the latest updates, SQL Server 2012 and especially SQL Server 2014, have built-in features that even further accelerate use of Azure as an extension of your SQL backup. But even if you have an older version of SQL, you can take advantage of this tool. What this tool does is it starts with the maintenance plan. A SQL maintenance plan is maybe familiar to you all. For example, once a day, you'll do a full SQL backup, and you'll place those backup files in a folder. And with this tool, you're going to point the tool to the folder that your maintenance plan is pointing to. In your SQL, or rather in your Azure portal, before we were looking at the recovery services area, now we're going to look at the storage area. And in your storage area, if the key component of your Azure storage is a subscription account, and there is an access key associated with your storage account. So you need to know the account name and the key. You see it's a long, complex passphrase is associated with each storage account. This is unlike the technology that secures the backup vaults, which is done with certificates. With your direct blob storage that we're going to be using here, it uses these secrets, which are like passphrases. So you need to know your storage account and your passphrase. And then you need to create a container where your SQL backups will go. When we look at our container list, we see I've created one. If you don't have a container, just push the Add button, provide a name. That's all you need to do. You've now created a storage location in Azure that's available for you to back up to and restore from. Going back to our SQL Server, I want to show you setup of the tool. So you point the tool to the location, to the backup path on your hard disk where the backups are going because of the SQL maintenance job. You give it a file pattern match unless you want to back up all of your databases. You just give it a pattern match for those that you'll be backing up. You give it the storage account and the container that you created, and in the details of the setup, you'll paste that storage key that's associated with your container. That's all you need to do to tell the tool what to do. The tool is then going to come in each evening. If we look at the file folder on the SQL Server where the backup files are going, for example, we're backing up the Operations Manager databases. So here's an Operations Manager database that's been selected. You can see that it's only 12 kilobytes in size. The tool does a number of things. Once a day, it's going to come in and it's going to compress and copy that backup file to your Azure storage container. Then it's also going to replace the backup file on your local storage with just a tiny little stub file that's only 12 kilobytes in size, which is actually a pointer to the real backup file that now resides in Azure. So unlike some of the solutions that we showed you with the Backup Vault, which are time limited to either 30 days in the case of Windows Server Backup Directly or 120 days in the case of DPM Server, in this solution where you're backing up to Azure Storage in the blob format, there's no time limit. So this is an appropriate place for you to put SQL backups for unlimited archive as long as you're going to keep that subscription active. So this solution using the tool, that's going to be applicable for all versions of SQL. There are other tools involving PowerShell. For example, here I'm going to show you, here's a Azure Storage Explorer view of the backup files that are in the Azure Storage blob. I'm going to run right now a PowerShell command that's going to back up the AdventureWorks demonstration database that's on this one SQL server, and it's going to back it up. There we go. It only takes a couple of seconds. So now I've transferred that backup file into Microsoft Azure. If I push my refresh button, you can see there at the top the database is now secure offsite. So any sort of tape vaulting, any sort of special storage that you provision, you now have a way to get your backup files immediately offsite into a safe place. If you want to restore them, here I've pre-staged on this other server the example of a tsql command that's executed within the SQL Server on a second server, and you can see that the processing took 21 seconds to restore both restore that backup file and create a database on a different SQL Server. So you can imagine incorporating this type of design into your DR plans. Very effective use of Azure Storage. And then just the last couple of minutes, let me show off that DPM Central Console and a few ways that Operations Manager can extend through its web console the value of the Microsoft DR solution wrapping around all of your workloads. In this scoped view of an Operations Manager console, you can see we have the management packs for Microsoft Windows Server Backup, DPM, the Data Protection Manager management pack that's installed by the Central Console feature of DPM, and also a Cloud Backup Application Management Pack. This is a management pack that I've authored and I'm announcing today has been released to the community. I'll show you the URL link that you can download this from here in just a second. And this is a companion management pack to the Microsoft-provided management pack monitoring your file server backup to local Windows backup. This management pack provides the same visibility when you're using the cloud backup of individual file servers to Microsoft. In the DPM Central Console, let me show you an example on a backup alert where there's a failure of we know that there's a few recovery replicas that have failed, and when I click on the alert here in the task area, we get context-sensitive tasks. For example, we have a task over here to run a consistency check. So we get the DPM alert, and this management group is managing an instance in Robert's lab in Sweden and an instance in my lab in Dallas. And so in this case, in one of those two locations, there's been a replica failure, and without doing any RDP, without activating any other console here within the context of my central console, which is Operations Manager, I can, for example, execute this run consistency check task and remediate the issue and allow the backups to resume. So I hope this shows briefly how you can scale Operations Manager. And then lastly, some web console views. Here's the Operations Manager console operating over the internet. This is over the pure internet, so this could be provided to a customer environment. Here's an example of a report that's been generated by the customer in an ad hoc basis. They can then choose to download this to PDF if they choose to retain this. For example, this is a report of DPM failures in the last week. Here's an example of some views that come with the DPM Central Console Management Pack that have been placed into a dashboard view. There's other examples. Here's an SLA view of a DPM file protection status. Here, this is a roll-up of the VM replicas that we had previously seen in the demonstration that didn't work out, I'm sorry. But we can see we're rolling up the replica health in the primary and the secondary site. Here's another example. On the left, we have the health status of the built-in Windows Server backup application. On the right, we have the status of the health of the cloud backup jobs using the management pack that I'm announcing today. So these are just briefly some ideas to get you thinking about how can you prove to your customers that their DR plan is effective with the Operations Manager Web Console. And the very, very last thing I'll show you is a partner extension from Civision. Provides a Unity Live Maps product that I've integrated here. And then here's my DPM instance in Dallas. Here's Robert's instance in Sweden. We can click on this. We can drill through. You can see I've added graphics. We've got the Sweden flag. I can drill in further. At a glance, I can see one of his 8 SQL instances has failed protection. So this is an example how partner solutions like those from Civision can really add even further value to the Microsoft DR stack that's offered by the Microsoft Cloud. Returning really quickly here to the main presentation, and let me advance to the slide where there's a couple of URLs that Robert and I want to call your attention to. Here we go. So coming up should be. Let's advance again. There we go. Robert wrote the top link, which is a very detailed step-by-step to enable the DPM backup vault that he showed you. I wrote the second article, which is an equally detailed step-by-step to enable the individual Windows file server backup to Azure. And then the third link is to the Operations Manager Unleashed blog site, where you can see a link to download the Cloud Management Pack, which is at systemcentercentral.com. Thank you very much.
If you guys have any questions, we'll be more than happy to hear them. We're running a bit late of time, but please step up, use the microphone, or...
Yeah, how many DPM server can you manage with
So the question was, how many DPM server can I manage with the management pack? Well, you can manage approximately 100 DPM servers, or 50,000 protected data sources. Check. Good. Any other questions? And please fill out the eval and look at the resources and the giveaways. And thank you so much for attending this session. So welcome everyone to this session where we will try to enlighten your mind on how to deliver disaster recovery as a service using the different technologies from the Microsoft product stack. Our ambition as presenters for this session is to provide you with that positive gut feeling that nothing is impossible to design when using the right tools provided from Windows Server, System Center, and of course, Microsoft Azure. My name is Robert Hedblom, and my background is delivering scenario-driven solutions based on the System Center stack, Windows Server, and Microsoft Azure technologies, with the main focus of backup as a service, restore as a service, and most importantly, disaster recovery as a service. I'm an MVP for System Center Cloud and Data Center Management, and I'm also an elected member of the Microsoft Extended Expert Team. I'm an author that's written 3 books, and I also deliver System Center trainings. I work for a company called Lumagate that is a specialized System Center company that delivers its services on a global scale. With me here on stage today, I have 2 of my friends, John Joyner and Shivam Garg. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Shivam. I'm a program manager in Data Protection Manager team. And before that, I worked on Hyper-V Replica, which is the key replication channel which is used in Microsoft Azure Site Recovery, as announced in the keynote by Brad. I joined Microsoft roughly 8 years back, and I have been working on backup and disaster recovery space from last 3 years. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Shivam. My name is John Joyner. I'm a Privileged to be a Microsoft MVP for System Center Data Center Management. My job at ClearPoint, which is a service provider specializing in delivery of managed services from Windows Azure, is Director of Product Development. My latest product is available in the Windows Azure Store, which delivers the ClearPoint management solution into Azure VMs. Let's go. In this session, we're going to cover a very topical and interesting theater of IT planning and operations that revolves around backup, restore, and disaster recovery solutions from Microsoft. So whether you're a service provider that provides services to other companies, or you provide services within your organization, the business concepts of backup as a service, recovery as a service, and disaster recovery as a service, as service offerings are going to be valid and hopefully interesting. So we're going to give you some specific examples of how you can assemble service offerings from the many tools that are available in the Microsoft Cloud platforms, which are, of course, Microsoft Azure, Windows.
And that, my friend, was an echo. You all got that? Cool. So what is a business continuity plan? Well, the main focus of a business continuity plan is to provide the correct information, for example, a disaster recovery scenario, okay? That will reflect the actual need of keeping the business up and running. So it's very important to understand that the business continuity plan is not a static document, okay? It is an activity. True. Another very important thing is that the business continuity plan should never, ever be designed nor implemented during an actual disaster. You're laughing. Good. And that's the key thing. Keep that in mind. A successful business continuity plan is always implemented and designed and put in production before the actual disaster. So keeping the business continuity plan in mind, we will now look at some of the 3 core components that defines the modern data centers for a company or an organization. So the actual number of servers are not important, okay? If you have 1,000 servers or 100, it's not important. What is important is that your data center provides different services to the organization that are highly resilient and, of course, highly automated. True? You care or not? Yeah? Good. So automation could either be done using System Center Orchestrator or SMA with the interaction of Azure Pack. So what it all comes down to is how you design your services. And the services that you would like to provide to your end user IT staff. How do you design them? Well, always start with a thorough planning. That's the first thing. Where you decide the actual goal for the service and the layout, like the roadmap, and the steps to create the service. Most important, never, ever talk about backup in the first place. Sound strange? What you should be doing is talking about restore and recovery of the service. Because backup is never a challenge when using Microsoft technologies. You know what backup is? It's all about design, how you design it, what components, and so on and so forth. The service that you will create will be a combination of different technologies and possibilities provided by Windows Server, System Center, and of course, Microsoft Azure.
Server and System Center. And we want you to take away from this presentation a solid understanding of how you should configure and manage the various tools to manage your various workloads to create your service offerings. We want to achieve with these offerings a solid sense of satisfaction that business continuity is going to happen regardless of the contingency, small or large. Robert, tell us about the agenda.
Of course. My pleasure. So what we will focus on delivering today is to make clear that all attending this session will understand some of the core concepts regarding disaster recovery, and most importantly, its dependencies. We will cover Data Protection Manager 2012 R2, We will also walk you through the Microsoft Cloud tool that you can use to empower your disaster recovery scenarios that will, of course, be reflected in your business continuity plan. Last but not least, we will also cover Azure Site Recovery. That is one of our recovery services in the Microsoft Azure technology. Sounds good? Yeah. Thumbs up?
All right.
Good. You're interacting. I like that. Awesome. So with that said, why don't we start this session by taking us back to the real beginning of planning a disaster recovery scenario. Let's start by look at something that we call a business continuity plan. So what is it?